All right. Uh, Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today for our discussion on the future of analytics. My name is Laura Shores, and I'm part of the marketing team here at CSU. Now, there's been a lot of discussion lately about the importance of faster, more continuous analysis and maximizing the amount of data that you're already collecting today. So we'll explore what that really means in our conversation and how we see companies executing on a more automated and comprehensive approach to analysis. Many of you are analytics leaders or owners of the data within your own organization. And we really hope that you come away from the conversation today with some actionable insights that you can take back and apply to your own teams. All right, so before I introduce our two panelists, I'll go ahead and cover some quick housekeeping. This is a live discussion today, and we'd really like to hear from you. So if you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A section to submit, and we'll be sure to address those during the discussion portion of our event today. And then if you're experiencing any technical issues at all, please use the chat function and raise that issue with our team. We'll go ahead and jump into a direct chat with you and get things resolved really quickly. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started. David, Barrett, if you'd like to turn on your cameras at this point and let me be the first to welcome you to our conversation today. And thanks so much to you both for sitting down with us. To kick us off, I'll go ahead and share some background on each of you, and then maybe I'll start with David. So David Menninger is the and it looks like they're having a little bit of issues turning on camera, so they'll be joining shortly. David Menninger is the SVP and Research Director. Oh, there's Barrett. Hi there. Pardon me, I'll start again. So David is the SVP and Research Director for Ventana Research, where he's responsible for the overall research direction of data and analytics technologies. He has over 30 years of experience bringing to market leading edge technologies in the analytics space. And then of course we have Barrett Hoffman here with us today. Barrett is the Vice President of Product here at CSU. She joined us from Google Cloud, where she launched several products aimed at helping businesses recruit and hire talent. And she joined Google through the acquisition of Bebop, where she was one of the earliest employees there. And while there, she also worked on getting her MBA at Stanford's Graduate School of Business. And prior to Stanford, Barrett worked at in enterprise storage at a company called Compellent, which was acquired by Dell. So thanks again to both of you for being here today. And I just want to make sure, can we see both of the attendees, both David and Barrett? Okay, terrific. So wonderful. So with that, David, would you like to kind of kick us off and start on your point of view? I thought maybe we could spend a few minutes with each of you sharing your points of view on the future of data and analytics in the enterprise. This will really set the stage for the rest of our conversation together. And after your presentations, we'll open it up to questions. So just want to make sure that everyone submits their questions in the Q&A portion of the screen, and we'll be sure to add that to our queue for discussion. So David, can you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Laura. Happy to be here, folks. As Laura said, we're going to talk about the future of analytics, and I'm going to start with the premise that I think maybe we've gotten it backwards, at least a little bit. We've designed all these systems so that people have to become experts at doing different types of analyses, and they have to become experts at bringing data together and preparing that data and analyzing that data. And we've sort of lost sight of the fact that people are trying to do jobs. How do we help them do their jobs as opposed to spend all this time doing these different types of analyses? And so that's kind of the premise I'd like you to think about here. And one of the ways, I think about how CSU operates in this market is looking at these things differently. And so maybe we can share with you how some of these things are a little different. And in terms of how we'll go about this, I'm going to give you some background to our research. We conduct primary market research, so I'll let you understand a little bit about how we're collecting the data that we'll share in the discussion today. We'll talk about how and why organizations are operating faster. Talk a little bit about how the cloud helps in that process. We'll look at automation and how to think about automation and the role that AI and machine learning, artificial intelligence and machine learning play in this process of operating faster. Let me start with some background to our research. We've conducted hundreds of surveys of organizations, and we've surveyed thousands of different organizations in the use of technology. I'll talk today primarily about 3 different studies we've done, one on machine learning, one on data and analytics in the cloud, and one on data preparation. But we've looked at lots of different topics around the use of technology and using information to run your businesses better. Generally, these studies look across industries, they look across company sizes. We try to ensure there's a reasonable distribution in the responses to the surveys. The one place where we do tend to have a bit of a bias, if you will, or focus is in North America. We operate primarily in North America. The surveys are open worldwide for participation, but since we don't operate in other regions, most of our responses, about 75 to 80% of our responses, tend to be from North America. But in all other respects, it's across industry sizes, across industries, and across company sizes. So hopefully this information you'll find relevant to you as well. And in terms of my background, Laura gave an introduction. I'm not going to review this information. It's in here in the deck for you to refer to later, but you should know my biases, right? We all have biases. And so as you interpret the information that I share, I think it's helpful for you to understand what my biases are. So I'll summarize that, I've been working in this industry for 30 years. Most of that time, about 25 years, is spent on the vendor side, bringing products to market. And about 5 years has been spent with Ventana Research, doing primary market research, as we just discussed. So let's talk about operating faster. All organizations are starting to operate faster. And we have an assertion that within the next couple of years, more than half of all organizations are going to include streaming data processing in their information architectures. It's just becoming a fact of life. You have to be able to deal with information as it streams into your organization. And if you think about it, data doesn't really occur in batches. We architected many of our information systems around the technical limitations we had at the time. We could only process information in batches. We couldn't take information as it occurred and process it immediately and make sure that that information was all consistent throughout the organization. Now, we're still not perfect at this, don't get me wrong, but we've made a lot of progress, and we now have ways to deal with information as it occurs rather than batching things up. And even if we're not processing it immediately, we're certainly processing it way more frequently than we used to. And if you think about the way data occurs, if you're a retail organization, you're selling things throughout the day. You may not be open all day, but the hours that you're open, you're selling things all day long, and you might operate in multiple geographies. And if you're a worldwide organization, you are operating 24/7. And if you're not, and you have a website, and you're doing online sales, you're operating 24/7 there. Customer support operations are another example where you may or may not have a service center that's open 24 hours a day, but many organizations do. In your production processes, in the various operations that you conduct, those things don't happen in batches, they happen continuously. Same thing with supply chain and logistics and moving goods throughout that supply chain, right? That's happening constantly. It's not happening in batches. And so in terms of operating faster, what we're really talking about is giving you the opportunity to react. You want to be able to react while you have the chance to influence the outcome. That's the whole objective here of operating faster. It's not just to move faster, it's to do things differently. It's to react in the moment and influence an outcome while you still have the opportunity. Some examples here, dynamic pricing. So if you've purchased an airline ticket, which many of us haven't done recently, you know that you may or may not know they use dynamic pricing models, right? The more the demand is, different days of the week or different routes, the pricing will be affected and the promotions will be varied as well. If you've got field service personnel, reprioritizing where those field service personnel go next, right? They're leaving one particular job site and they may be sent to a different customer location based upon something that might have just happened with your interactions with that customer. Predictive maintenance and trying to maintain your systems running as much as possible, whether those are physical pieces of equipment or whether they're computer systems. If you can detect and prevent a catastrophic outage, a small amount of downtime might save you a large amount of lost uptime for that equipment. And rerouting supply chain and distributions operations. If you've got some hiccup in your supply chain, you can, if you detect that and know of that information, you can reroute either goods coming into your organization or being distributed to your customers. So a couple examples of how operating faster can let you behave differently in the market. And we ask organizations, how often are they bringing their data together? And I'm old enough to remember when weekly and monthly was still a stretch. It was hard for people to do that, never mind daily. And now we look at the world, and 82% of the organizations are operating daily, and a third of those organizations are processing data multiple times per day, either every hour or even in real time. So this is becoming much more common, and we'll see these faster processing time segments move and grow over time, I'm sure. Let's talk a little bit about how the cloud plays a role in this process. We've asked organizations, and the vast majority expect that most of their data will be in the cloud. So 86% of organizations told us they expect the majority of their data will be stored in the cloud eventually. A third of them already have their primary data lake platform in the cloud. So this is not just a future, this is happening today. Again, not the majority of organizations yet, but a significant number are already operating in the cloud as their primary data lake platform. And nearly everyone expects to do analytics in the cloud. So about half, if I remember correctly, it's 47% are doing analytics in the cloud today, but 99% do analytics in the cloud at some point in the future. Why? Why is the cloud so important in this process? Well, I would suggest it's primarily because it's easy, right? It's easier to set these systems up. If we're talking about operating faster, one of the things about operating faster is getting systems up and running, right? Well, if a system is operating as a service in the cloud, it's already up and running. So that's faster, and that's also easier. Cost is another aspect of this, right? There are many scenarios where the cloud offers cost advantages. The one scenario where perhaps the cloud doesn't offer a cost advantage is if you're operating 24/7, consuming a system in its entirety. Perhaps it could be more expensive in the cloud, but when you consider the services that go along with that, the maintenance of the systems, I suspect you'll find that the cloud is probably less expensive, even if you're operating in a 24/7 type scenario. So cloud makes it easier, makes it faster. Let's talk about automation. So one of the ways you achieve speed is through automation. Now, I'd like to suggest that you think about automation not really about replacing individuals, but assisting them, taking the tasks that are mundane, that are routine, the things they have to do over and over again. They're not very fulfilling, and the individual task itself is probably not that valuable. Also, free them from those tasks and allow them to focus on things that are much more valuable to your organization. Some of the tasks that you can automate are difficult things. They're not all just these minute, mundane things, but some of these things are difficult, and by automating them, you make them less difficult, make them much more repeatable and easier for individuals then to consume the information that comes out of those processes so that they make better decisions, right? So if we can automate a bunch of things to get information to the people that need to make decisions, they can make better decisions with that information. Effectively, what you're trying to do here is you're creating more of a self-service environment. When you automate things, you're making it easier for the individual to get their job done without as much assistance. And when we look at the research, it suggests that there's a correlation between those organizations that have a self-service environment and the success of their projects. So when we ask organizations if they can access their analytics without the assistance of IT, about 47% of organizations say that they can do that, and about 53% say they cannot. Those who cannot access it tend to be, without the assistance of IT, tend to be less satisfied in the outcomes of their analytics efforts. So, correlation is not causation, but there's certainly a correlation here between those organizations that provide a self-service environment and the satisfaction and success of their analytics efforts. So if you're going to automate, one of the things that can help in that automation process is AI and machine learning. We expect that more than half of all the data processes in an organization will incorporate some form of artificial intelligence or machine learning to help deal with that data. These processes are not always easy. These processes, to some extent, are some of those mundane processes that we talked about earlier. So if we can take these processes and apply AI and machine learning to them, we can help organizations get more value out of the data that they're working with. There are some obstacles. AI and machine learning are not necessarily easy to use. One of the challenges, the biggest challenge you see here on the screen, is accessing and preparing the data. That's the most common challenge that organizations cite in doing these types of analyses. We see that's common across many types of analytics. Accessing and preparing the data is a challenge. So back to that notion of automating things, if you can automate some of the accessing and preparing data, that's going to help. But the other thing that's going to help, the second biggest challenge you'll see on the screen here, is not enough skilled resources. These analyses are not necessarily things that the majority of people have learned how to do. I certainly didn't study these things in my academic education. I've learned a bit about it on the job. We're starting as an industry to train more people in these types of analyses, but it's still not universal, and it's never going to be universal that everybody's going to become a data scientist. So if you can find ways to deliver these capabilities that overcome both of those challenges, you're going to help organizations operate better. So once you've created one of these analyses, typically referred to as a model, you need to deploy that model into the organization. If you're going to operate faster, remember the premise of today's discussion, if you're going to operate faster, that model has to be in place and has to be used over and over again as data arrives in the organization. You don't want to turn around and say, every time a new piece of data arrives, we have to have a data scientist do a new analysis. You don't have to do it that way. You take the output of the data analysis process and you put it into operations. That way, organizations can respond as the data arrives. They can respond in time to get some of those benefits we talked about earlier. But automation is critical, right? The data is constantly changing. So you've automated it by putting it into a production process. Market conditions change. Those conditions require that the analyses continue to be updated. New data, new market conditions, analyses need to be updated. Well, that's one of the real benefits of machine learning and artificial intelligence, is that they can evolve over time. They're not necessarily static analyses. So that's another role of AI and machine learning in this process. And the last point I want to make about it is that it ensures good governance. So if you're using automated processes, you're using repeatable processes, these repeatable processes are things that you know and have approved, as opposed to somebody going off in a corner performing some new type of analysis that you may not have vetted properly within your organization. So what I'd like you to take away from this discussion is to think about how your organization operates and think about operating as a streaming organization. Make that your just like organizations have adopted a cloud first mentality, think about adopting a streaming first mentality. Now that may require that you rethink some of your data processes, right? You're probably not set up to operate that way today. You're going to prioritize, right? You're not going to be able to do everything at once necessarily, and I don't expect organizations to become 100% continuous types of analyses, but identify those high value areas and focus on those first. And in those areas, automate as much as possible to support those activities. And then we talked about some of the challenges. You're going to need to find tools and technologies that can help you implement this vision. And this is actually a good jumping off point to hand it over to Sisu to talk to you about their tools and technologies and how they might help implement this vision. So Barrett, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dave. And really, really appreciate hearing your insights and some of the trends and observations that you're seeing in the industry. And as you said, I'd love to spend a little bit of time talking about Sisu and how we're really looking to actually bring in some of that automation and assistance that you referenced in the tool that we've provided. So with that, I will dive right into it. And actually, although we are mostly going to be talking about the future of analytics, I wanted to start with maybe just a little bit of a history lesson, a little bit of a looking back. This quote that you see here is actually from a man by the name of Herbert Simon from 1971. And you see here him talking about how wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. And the reason I like this quote is because it's quite striking that if you fast forward 50 years later, and this is actually a quote that we heard from a prospective customer not more than a few weeks ago. Unfortunately, we're still facing the same problem. And if anything, it's arguably gotten worse, where there's just so much data, there's so many metrics for a business to be tracking that trying to monitor all of them, it is just so challenging, and it becomes so difficult to pull out and know where to focus your attention. And this is, if we kind of generalize what has been the inspiration or the motivation for why we've built Sisu, and what are some of the dilemmas that we are seeing analysts face, it really boils down to too much data and not enough time. And we kind of hear this come up in three different areas: speed, coverage, and utility, as you see here. So, with the volume of data growing, and Dave, as you were talking about the pace at which new data is coming in, as that increases, the need to get answers faster becomes even more important, and that is really, really challenging for analysts. In addition, there's this question of, are we being comprehensive? Are we covering all of the different dimensions as we attempt to answer those questions? And do we have confidence that we're getting that coverage? And then finally, are the answers that we're getting, are they clear enough to actually drive action? We talked about the value of being able to do, very up to date, up to the minute analysis is to be able to act on it. And so the answers that you pull out of the analysis need to be clear enough to be actionable. So I actually want to spend a little bit of time even digging in a bit further. As Laura mentioned at the beginning, I lead product and design at Sisu, and one of the things that we do a lot of is user research, and really spending a lot of time just talking to both current and prospective users of Sisu, and really trying to understand what, go underneath a little bit and kind of get on the ground to understand what exactly are people running into. There's a couple insights that I think are really relevant to the conversation that we're having today. The first is this pattern or consistent need that we hear from analysts that we've talked to about needing to be able to react really quickly to constant change. And I've added a couple quotes here, I think, just that hopefully resonate with a lot of the folks on the call today. But this pressure to kind of be constantly monitoring things, to have to adapt to changing requirements in the business, to have to be able to, look at data with different kind of slicing and dicing and filtering, because the needs of the company are changing so rapidly, and because as a result, the answers that the company needs are changing underneath. And, with so much of this data, it can actually be very difficult to know where to look. And again, a couple quotes here that really stuck out to me in some of the recent research that we've done. First, acknowledging that analysts really are kind of charged with, or tasked with being the forerunners to the business, and really kind of getting ahead of and trying to understand if and when things are changing, how are they changing? And, again, with the growing volume and kind of dimensionality of data that businesses are able to collect today, knowing where to look becomes increasingly difficult. And so I love this quote here of kind of, where are the places that we should be looking that we aren't even looking yet? I think that captures very well a consistent theme that we've heard is a challenge for a lot of analytics organizations. And so if I were to kind of sum up, the key theme here is there's a handful of metrics that businesses really care about, but those metrics, the values of them, the factors that are influencing or having an impact on the metrics are changing faster than we as humans can explain why. And to just underline this point a little bit, as you see on the left-hand side of the slide here, 3 very common kind of simple metrics: conversion, some representation of retention and churn, and then customer lifetime value. And it's very, very common for any one of these metrics to have, kind of tens or maybe even 100 or more different dimensions or columns in your data of what could be influencing or impacting that metric. And again, this gets back to our ability to collect and cost effectively in the cloud store more and more data. With that comes more and more
All right, I think Barrett is frozen, but I'm getting a notification here that she should be able to rejoin us here shortly. So apologies about that, but
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, there you are.
Sorry about that. This is the fun of remote remote presentations. I apologize for that. Let me just get back up here.
No problem.
Presenting.
Keeping it interesting.
There you go. So is this?
Yes, that's where we left off with you, Barrett.
Okay, great. I think I'm getting a thumbs up here, so I'll dive right into it. So what I was mentioning, and hopefully it didn't cut off or hopefully I'm not repeating too much here, but just to kind of underline again that even for very simple metrics, the number of different variables or columns that could be impacting the metric, even with simple metrics, gets to tens of millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of combinations pretty quickly and pretty easily. And that's just very challenging for a person to be able to stay on top of what is actually driving change in the metric. So that's really kind of the motivation and inspiration for why we built Sisu. very quickly changing data, very quickly growing data requires the ability to analyze that data even faster. And so kind of our inspiration was, you know, what if you could go from not just knowing what your data is telling you, but actually understanding why metrics are changing? What if you could do that 10x faster? What if you could answer that why question 10x times more every day? What kind of impact would that have on your business and your ability to, as Dave talked about, actually be able to respond in real time to metrics as they're changing? And so just to talk a little bit about how we solve that with Sisu. We take a very metrics first approach to the product. And so everything is really grounded in you know, what is the metric that you care about? And then what are the potential factors or columns, like we said, that could be impacting that metric? And once you set that up, that's really all you as the analyst need to do. And Sisu then takes over that kind of that rote work of actually, you know, automating the analysis and being able to test, you know, within a matter of seconds, tens or even hundreds of millions of combinations, and pull out from your data then, here are the combinations or the subpopulations, if you will, in your data that are actually driving a change on your metric, that are actually causing the metric to go up or the metric to go down. And what that means is that you as the analyst do not have to do that kind of very arduous manual task of going in and trying to guess at, hey, I think this population could be impacting the metric, or maybe it was a result of something happening in this geography. You know, that very hypothesis driven and manual approach to trying to find these answers, we kind of flip that on its head and we say, let's actually test every single combination that could be impacting the metric and then pull out the ones that actually are. And to do that, we actually, to ensure that you're able to then focus on the highest impact populations, we actually calculate what a concept that we call, you know, kind of the impact of that subpopulation. So think of it as almost like the lift or the drag that that subpopulation had on your metric. So, you know, we can actually capture in a statistical way, you know, how much did this subpopulation account for increasing or decreasing a change in your metric, or that kind of impact on overall performance. And, you know, not only are we able to, like I said, test all of those different combinations, but we very quickly also sort and order them by impact so that you see the most important, the most relevant and interesting subpopulations first. And, you know, the other thing I'll actually mention there before moving on is it's not just doing that once, right? But to Dave's point about data constantly coming in and changing, you know, by the hour, even by the minute, Sisu is able to continually reevaluate as new data comes in to rerun that analysis again, because we're able to do it so quickly. We're able to deliver those answers at a very rapid and continual and proactive pace, so that you as the analyst can be actually alerted proactively, oh, hey, here's an interesting subpopulation. There's something going on here. You know, let me, as kind of the expert of the business, figure out what that means for how we need to act. A couple other things to just highlight, you know, in addition to kind of automating that analysis and surfacing the subpopulations that are most relevant and interesting in terms of driving change in your metric, we're able to also provide a platform where, you know, you as a team of analysts, or even looping in some of the stakeholders on the business side, are able to kind of collaboratively review, share, discuss what we call facts. And we're very intentional about calling them facts because we think the term insights is a little overused and overpromised. And really what we're doing is we are pulling out statistically grounded facts from your data and allowing you to kind of consume, save, and collaboratively discuss what to do about those facts. And finally, I mentioned this kind of automated piece, but you know, one of the other capabilities that Sisu provides is the ability to just subscribe to get updates automatically. And you know, you can choose, again, you're the expert of your business. You can choose what are the thresholds that are interesting or warrant your attention. Is it a certain size of, you know, if there's a subpopulation that's driven a certain size of change in the metric, maybe you want to be alerted about that. Maybe there are certain factors or kind of columns in your data that are particularly actionable. And so anytime one of those is driving or having a significant impact on the metric, you want to be alerted about that. And being able to do that, again, we want to use technology and ML to automate the things that humans shouldn't have to be constantly checking and monitoring. And so having this, you know, subscription or automatic alerting is a way to ensure that you as a very busy person don't have to always be coming in and checking and monitoring that stuff yourself. So just a quick kind of reference, we have a case study up on this is one of my favorite case studies from the website about Samsung, who actually has used Sisu to look at kind of what types of customers, what types of factors are most likely to cause someone to upgrade to devices. And I actually mentioned, if you're interested, you can check out this case study, which I do recommend. I also want to add one thing that's not in the case study that I think is really relevant about how we work with Samsung, which is not just, you know, what you see here is kind of the answer to a very particular question. But Samsung is also using Sisu to, as I mentioned, since we're talking about this, the power of automation, Samsung is also using Sisu to, in general, just automate the facts that they are consuming on a weekly basis about their e-commerce business. And again, what is driving the metrics that they care about to go up or down on a weekly basis, which I think really helps underline what we've been talking about today. So just to kind of summarize, you know, I think as the world is evolving and the amount of data we have is growing, the dimensionality of that data is growing, and you know, as the capabilities that we have come to expect and enjoy from the cloud are increasing, you know, those are really the trends that we're trying to take advantage of and provide with Sisu a solution that is fast and comprehensive and proactive to kind of meet you as a business where you need to be in terms of getting the full value out of your data. So, you know, starting with the metrics that matter, taking a really metrics-driven approach, automating the pieces of analysis that are either intractable to humans or just not a good use of their time to be kind of just testing every single combination of the data. That enables you to focus on those high impact subpopulations and really collaboratively consume and digest those as a business, not just in the product, but also in an automated way. So you don't have to be always coming back in to kind of monitor manually. And that is really what I wanted to cover from the perspective of Sisu. Apologies for the short interruption partway through, but this is the remote world we live in now. And with that, I'd love to hand it over to Laura.
Awesome. Excuse me. Thanks so much, Barrett. So that really sets the stage for the rest of our conversation together. I'm mindful of time. I think we've got about 15 minutes left, and I'm already seeing questions coming through from the audience. And yeah, so let's just jump right in. One of the things that you both spoke about is the ability to evaluate all of your data all of the time. And so that continuous approach. And I'm curious how you think that continuous approach will change the way data is used within companies and organizations today. Perhaps I'll hand it off to David to answer first.
Sure, I'll start there. I think one of the things about being able to work with data faster is there's a focus around customer experience, and it's really become a theme to what technology investments provide and what a lot of other organizations' processes provide. And so if you can operate faster, if you can continually analyze things, you can improve the customer experience. And ultimately, that's what the customer wants. And delivering what the customer wants is good for the business as well. So I think a customer experience focus is a good way to think about these things and think about what data do you have and what data can you process more quickly to improve the customer experience.
That's terrific. Any thoughts there, Barrett?
No, I mean, I think that David hit it on hit the nail on the head there. I think you know, translating to the customer experience, right? And you know, I think I'll just maybe add that although maybe not as obvious, but I think that actually ties in nicely with this notion of taking a very metrics first or metrics driven approach to analysis. You know, because businesses know what metrics matter to them and to their customers, right? And they use those KPIs to monitor and stay on top of those things. And so I think, you know, ensuring that we're not doing analysis for analysis' sake, right? We're not doing it just to kind of show, hey, we found this really cool thing, but it doesn't actually impact what it is that we as a business care about, which you know, should be grounded in the customers and who we're serving. So that would be the one piece that I would add there.
Terrific. Awesome. So given that, and Barrett, you did talk a little bit about collaboration and kind of the differentiators, I guess, from a workflow process for analysts using Sisu. And this question is for both of you, but of course I have my Sisu hat on. How is the analyst's role evolving in how they work with operational decision makers, given kind of all these new capabilities and trends in data and analysis?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll maybe jump in with a couple thoughts and then hand it over to you, David. So I think one thing that is certainly striking, and I think this came through in some of the quotes that we talked about in the user research, is just the volume of questions and the rate at which those questions are evolving and changing, right? It's not just a one static question, and as long as we have that answer, we're good to go, right? It's, you know, I mean, actually, we're living in a time of immense change right now, and you know, who would have predicted everything that's going on with COVID? And that's a great example of, you know, all of a sudden looking at maybe the exact type of analyses or the exact kind of slicing and dicing that you did 6 months ago is just not relevant, because all of a sudden the time windows that you care about have changed. Maybe the dimensions that are actually having an impact have changed, and as a result you kind of want to drill down on one of those dimensions and one of those subpopulations. So you know, that's one thing I would probably really underline, is the, I guess, the kind of dynamics with which the types of questions and kind of the pace at which we need to answer questions between kind of operational needs of the business and the analytics that the, you know, analytics team is trying to drive. I think just we're seeing those change so quickly and need to be very responsive. David, I don't know if you want to add anything else there.
Yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit more controversial perhaps, and say that I'd like to see the analyst role eliminated, right? Let Sisu be the analyst, Sisu or whatever technology, right? What we're really trying to do is help people do their jobs. Back to my opening slide with getting things backwards, right? We don't want to enable more analysts. We want to enable more operational decision makers. And just like enabling self-service, right? Self-service often really refers to analysts. What we want to enable is people to do their jobs, those operational decision makers, to get the information they need and to be able to act on it. And to the extent we can minimize the role of the analyst, that's a great thing. So the analyst can be involved in helping to set these things up, but ideally we'll get to the point where that information just gets right into the hands of the operational decision makers.
Yeah, and I might even, I love the taking kind of harder stand there. And one thing that I would add too is what then does that enable the analyst to spend time on instead, right? And one of the things that comes to my mind is being more intentional about experimentation, as an example, right? Does automating the analysis enable you as an analyst then to say, well, I still kind of know and understand my business and kind of the data collection mechanisms that we have here. What types of maybe A/B, tests or comparisons do I now want to run because I have this hypothesis that I've discovered by using a tool like Sisu to pull out an interesting insight. Well, now I can go and I can run with that, and I can conduct experiments, or I can even influence the way that we run the business. So
I thought the same thing. I thought about A/B testing and what data don't we have, right? We can take the data we have and analyze, but what data don't we have? But we can go out and get more of that data.
Exactly.
Yep.
So Barrett, just to clarify, is it fair to what's Sisu's stance on the role of the analyst moving forward? We don't think they're going away, do we?
No, and I think this is part of kind of why that thought popped into my mind, right? I think again, we view there's the technology is to do what technology is good at doing, right? Which is making intractable problems tractable, and using AI, ML, and automation to do that. And so that's kind of where I think the example of A/B testing, or as David said, being able to go out and collect data that we otherwise don't have, right? Sisu is only able to operate on the data that the business collects and feeds into Sisu. So, to get better answers, I think there is a really interesting role that an analyst can play to say, hey, here's where we need to be looking instead, or here's an experiment that we really should be running. I think that's, and really viewing Sisu as almost that secret tool in your tool belt that enables you to just move faster and get to those ideas even faster.
Terrific. And then both of you touched on automation as parts of your presentation. How is that different than augmented analysis?
Well, let me jump in first and say, I'm not really advocating that we get rid of analysts. I was trying to be a little bit controversial to make it interesting. And if you refer back to my slides, right, I said, we're not talking about replacing people. We're talking about helping them, doing the parts of their job that are hard, some of these analyses are really difficult to construct. And so if we can help automate some of the processes of putting the raw material together for the analysis, you then enable the individual to use that information, do something interesting with it. So there's a variety of ways that we're augmenting analyses. I mean, just if you go back to the data, the slide talks about the biggest challenge is preparing the data, right? So to the extent that you can automate some of these processes of getting the data, because a lot of these analyses require the data to be in specific formats, right? It needs to be binned, okay? Are those equal population bins or equal range bins? And you may not even know that. So to the extent you can automate some of those things, you're augmenting the process that they're doing as opposed to replacing what they're doing, and letting them focus on what they do with the information that they get out of the process.
And I do want to make sure that we have time to get to an audience question as well. I'm looking at one that just came through, and I know that there are a number of attendees from regulated industries that are here with us today, and I think that's maybe the perspective that they're coming from with this question. But they asked, how do you recommend managing data privacy when the focus is speed?
I'll jump in first. I'm going to refer back to that notion of automation and AI and machine learning. To the extent you have these processes built and approved, right? You know that you're not using personally identifiable data in an inappropriate way, right? You have some governance built into your processes by the fact that the processes themselves have been reviewed and approved. Now, if new or different information comes in, then you need to, put new processes in place for that new or different information. But if the information you're collecting has been assessed and been determined, how you need to deal with it from a privacy perspective, you've baked that into the process.
Yeah, and one additional thought there, couple things that we kind of take a stance on from a CISO perspective. One thing is most PII is actually not helpful in analytics. In fact, like we don't want it, right? Like knowing a user's name is not really a super actionable, actionable dimension of your data, right? So we actually encourage our customers to say, think about, again, we want that anonymization to have taken place, and think about like any data that you are using in your analysis, is it actually helping your analysis? And I would argue that with a lot of the personally identifying information, it's actually not helping. So that's one additional thought, but I think it comes back to the same point, David, that you're saying, which is if you have the processes in place set up so that as that data comes in, you're anonymizing it or masking it properly, I think then it shouldn't get in the way of being able to go through the analysis quickly.
Awesome. And I think we probably have time for another question, but we do have the Q&A function. Just want to remind everyone, and if you submit those questions and we don't get to them today, we'll be sure to follow up on those questions. One of them just came through that maybe Barrett, you can tackle, asking how does Sisu compare to traditional BI tools and dashboards, and where does it fit in the overall data stack?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. So, we think of Sisu as really being purpose built to answer the why question. Whereas, I think dashboards and kind of traditional BI tools do a wonderful job of helping answer what, right? So helping look at data, helping understand, did a metric go up? Did it go down? And Sisu, on the other hand, is really kind of complementary in that sense, where once you see the what, I think the immediate question is, well, why? Why did it go up? Why did it go down? And when we say purpose built, I think that's where it really comes down to being able to, I talked about comprehensiveness, right? Being able to test every combination, so that you're removing bias from how you answer that question. If you were to do that in kind of a traditional dashboard, you'd probably pick a few things that you want to slice and dice by that you think impact the metric. But what about the things that you don't think impacted the metric or haven't historically, and so you don't have them in your dashboard? That's an example of where, being really laser focused on this answering the why question and having been built for the kind of scale and parallel processing in the cloud that enables us to do that quickly. That's really where Sisu can come in and in that sense actually really like supercharge what you're already able to see in the dashboard from a what perspective. So, we actually do really look at how do we streamline the workflow. We know that, analysts and business users alike are still going to be looking at dashboards, but as an example, we integrate so that getting to Sisu from the dashboard to the analysis in Sisu is just a one-click step. And then in Sisu, you can kind of consume that, here's the why, and even do some of that incremental drill down. So maybe one of the answers to the why is a subpopulation that then spurs another question. And you're able to kind of then do that all within Sisu.
Awesome. And we did get a kind of a follow-up question. Sorry, Barry, you're really putting you on the spot here, but another Sisu related question. What are the most common Sisu use cases? And I think you talked through some of the maybe like KPIs, but
yeah, let me hit on a few of those just to get a little sharper on the use case. So there's actually, since I know we're going to be pressed for time, I'll cover two that I think are probably most interesting and get used the most. The first is something we call time comparison. So it's really taking any metric, and again, we're agnostic of what the metric is, really just point us at a table and point us at the column that you care about as the metric, and we can run with that. But a use case there would be being able to look across time and specify any time windows you want. So you might want to be able to say, Why did my metric, why did average order value on my e-commerce website, as an example, why did average order value go up this week versus last week? And so what CISU will do then is actually analyze what drove change from that first time period to that second time period and pull out subpopulations, both that had an increase and a decrease. So you can actually, maybe overall the metric went up, but there's some problematic subpopulations that are actually pulling it down, that if you could, address those, you could even have a bigger increase. So that's one use case. Another is actually going to be something we call a group comparison, which is doing a similar kind of compare two groups, but instead of over time, you're defining those two groups. So an example there might be, we talked about A/B testing, right? Let's say that I have a treatment or even a promotion. Let's say I run a promotion and I run two different promotions and I want to know which one performed better. I might know at a high level, promotion B performed better than promotion A, but why was that? Was that true for everyone? Or, so CISU can actually pull out, hey, B performed much better for these sub-segments in your data, but it was actually worse for these segments. So maybe you only want to target the ones for whom B performed better and keep A for the ones where A performed better. Those are some, a little bit more detail on the use cases.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I love the rapid fire questions and appreciate you both letting me pepper you with questions. We are right at time. I want to make sure that folks have time to jump to their next engagement and maybe grab another cup of coffee. So thanks again, Barrett and David, for a terrific conversation. Also, thanks very much to those of you that tuned in. Really appreciate your great questions and engagement throughout this morning. I do just want to quickly recap some of the key takeaways from our conversation today. Analysis should be done continuously to respond to changes in your data and to keep the business on track. As Barrett pointed out, start with the metrics that matter and identify those highest value areas of focus, like David mentioned, and then look for those opportunities to automate. It's not about like eliminating folks, it's about freeing individuals from the mundane tasks and that rote work. So with that, I hope that you took away some sort of actionable information today that you can take back to your home organizations. And following this webinar, what you can expect from us is an email with more information on how to stay in touch with David and Barrett. And we're really looking forward to continuing the conversation and the dialogue with all of you. So signing off for now, and thanks again so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.